The doors of the temple of On swung open, and a young woman froze at the sound of chariot wheels crashing to a halt outside the courtyard. Her father's voice rang out across the stone floor, sharp with an urgency she had never heard from him before. Asenath, come now. She did not know it yet, but the life she had always known was about to end, and a new one bound forever to a Hebrew slave turned ruler of Egypt, was about to begin. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Asenath was the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, a city devoted to the worship of the sun. She had grown up inside marble courtyards and golden halls, surrounded by incense smoke and the low chanting of priests. She knew the names of 100 gods. She had watched her father lift his hands to the sky more times than she could count. And yet, in the quiet of her own heart, she had always felt a strange emptiness, a sense that the gods of Egypt, for all their gold and glory, never truly answered. She kept this feeling hidden. A priest's daughter was not permitted to doubt. She was 17 years old, poised, intelligent, and guarded in a way that unsettled the men who sought her hand. Suitors had come from noble families across Egypt, offering land, cattle, and alliances. Her father had turned every one of them away without explanation. Asenath did not ask why. She had learned long ago that her father's silences carried more weight than his words. On the day the chariots arrived, Potiphar did not summon her to discuss another suitor. He summoned her because Pharaoh himself had sent for her by name. Asenath's hands trembled as she smoothed the fabric of her linen gown. No one refused a summons from Pharaoh. Whatever waited for her beyond those temple doors, she could not run from it. "Father, what have I done?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Potiphar's face was unreadable, but his eyes betrayed something rare in him, fear mixed with awe. "You have done nothing, my daughter. But everything is about to change," he told her, in short and careful words, of a man named Joseph. A Hebrew, a former slave, a prisoner who had once been falsely accused and cast into the darkest cell in Egypt. And yet, within a matter of days, this same man had stood before Pharaoh, interpreted a dream that baffled every magician and wise man in the kingdom, and had been lifted from chains to the second highest seat in all the land. Pharaoh had placed his own signet ring on Joseph's hand. He had draped him in fine linen and gold. He had declared that no one in Egypt would lift a hand or foot without Joseph's word. And now, Pharaoh wished for this man to have a wife. Asenath's breath caught in her throat. "A slave," she said. "You would give me to a slave?" "He is no longer a slave," her father said quietly. "He is Zaphenath-Paneah now, second only to Pharaoh, and whatever god he serves, Asenath, that god has not abandoned him." He paused, choosing his next words with visible difficulty. "I have watched many men rise in Egypt. I have never watched one rise like this." She wanted to protest. Every part of her upbringing told her to resist a match arranged without her voice, to a foreigner, a man whose people were despised by many in Egypt as shepherds and outsiders. But something in her father's tone, some crack in his composure, silenced her. That night, Asenath could not sleep. She sat by the narrow window of her chamber and looked out over the rooftops of On, the same rooftops she had watched every evening of her life. Tomorrow, all of it would change. She pressed her hand against the cool stone wall and whispered a question into the darkness, though she was not sure which god, if any, was listening. "Who is this man they are giving me to?" She would not have to wait long to find out. The meeting took place in a hall reserved for matters too important for ordinary chambers. Pharaoh himself presided, seated on a raised platform, flanked by officials whose faces Asenath barely registered. Her eyes moved past them all, searching, until they landed on the man standing near the center of the room. He did not look like a man who had spent years in a dungeon. He stood tall, dressed in fine white linen, a gold chain resting against his chest, his dark eyes calm in a way that unsettled her more than any anger could have. There was no arrogance in his posture, no cruelty in his expression. He looked, instead, like a man who had already survived the worst that life could offer, and had come out the other side carrying something she could not name. Peace, perhaps, or purpose. Joseph turned, and their eyes met for the first time. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence stretched long enough that one of Pharaoh's officials shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. Asenath felt heat rise to her cheeks, unused to being studied so openly, yet she found she could not look away either. "Asenath, daughter of Potiphar," Pharaoh finally said, his voice carrying across the hall. "I give you as wife to Zaphenath-Paneah, ruler over all the land of Egypt, second only to myself." It was not a question. It was a decree, and yet, as the words settled over her, Asenath felt something unexpected stir beneath her fear. Not resistance, curiosity. Joseph stepped forward and, for the first time, spoke directly to her. His voice was low, steady, without the practiced flattery she had heard from suitors before him. "I know this is not the life you imagined for yourself," he said. "I did not imagine mine either." A flicker of something crossed his face, quickly hidden.
You are safe here.
"But I have learned that the life we are given is not always the life we expect. Sometimes it is greater than anything we could have planned." Asenath studied him carefully. "You speak as though you have suffered." "I have," Joseph said simply. He did not elaborate, not yet, but something in the way he said it told her the suffering had been real, and recent, and deep. She did not know, in that moment, that this brief exchange was the beginning of a bond that would carry both of them through years of famine, fear, betrayal, and eventually, reconciliation with a family Joseph had not seen in over a decade. She only knew that when he spoke, she believed him. The marriage was arranged swiftly, as Pharaoh commanded. Within days, Asenath found herself standing in a home far grander than her father's, dressed in garments befitting the wife of Egypt's second highest official, surrounded by servants she did not yet know, in a life she had not chosen for herself. That first night, alone with her new husband in the quiet of their chambers, Asenath finally allowed herself to ask the question that had haunted her since the summons arrived. "Tell me what happened to you," she said. "Tell me why a man who wears gold now once wore chains." Joseph was quiet for a long moment, staring at nothing, as though deciding how much of the wound to reopen. Then he began to speak. He told her of 11 brothers who had once hated him so fiercely they had thrown him into a pit and left him for dead, before selling him instead to traders bound for Egypt. He told her of years spent as a slave in the house of a man named Potiphar, of working faithfully despite his stolen freedom, only to be falsely accused by his master's wife and thrown into prison for a crime he never committed. He told her of forgotten promises, of a cupbearer he had helped, who swore to remember him before Pharaoh and then did not, for 2 long years. He told her of dreams he had interpreted since he was young, dreams that had once caused his own family to despise him, and dreams that had finally, after everything, become the very thing that saved him. 13 years, Joseph said quietly. 13 years between the pit and the palace. Asenath sat in silence, stunned. She had imagined a man of privilege, elevated by luck or favor. She had not imagined a man forged by such suffering, and yet unbroken by it. "How did you not become bitter?" she asked. "How did you not hate them? Your brothers, your master's wife, the cupbearer who forgot you?" Joseph's answer would stay with her for the rest of her life. "Because I came to believe that my God was working, even in the silence. Even in the prison, even when no one remembered me. I could not see it while I was in the pit, but I can see it now." It was the first time Asenath heard him speak of his God, not as a distant idea, but as a presence he trusted the way another man might trust the ground beneath his feet. She did not yet understand this God. But she understood, for the first time, that whatever had happened to Joseph, it had not been random. It had been leading somewhere. Over the following months, Asenath began to see the truth of Egypt unfolding before her, and she began to see the shape of the purpose Joseph had spoken of. The 7 years of abundance Joseph had predicted came exactly as he said they would. Grain poured into the storehouses of every city until the measuring of it was abandoned as hopeless. Egypt grew fat and prosperous under Joseph's careful administration, while Asenath watched her husband labor tirelessly, riding out to inspect storehouses, meeting with officials from every region, rarely resting. It was during this season of plenty that Asenath discovered she was carrying a child. She remembered the fear in her own heart when she told Joseph, uncertain how a man so consumed by the weight of a nation would receive the news. His reaction erased every doubt. He knelt before her, pressed his hand gently against her, and for a long moment said nothing at all, his eyes bright with an emotion she had never seen in him before. Their first son was born in the 3rd year of plenty. Joseph named him Manasseh, "For God has made me forget all my hardship, and all my father's household," he told her, his voice thick with feeling as he held the child for the first time. Asenath watched him carefully, knowing that beneath the joy of the moment lay an old wound, a family far away that he had not seen in years, a father who likely still grieved him as dead. She said nothing, she simply placed her hand over his and let the silence speak. If this story is touching your heart, leave a comment below and don't forget to like this video. Their second son arrived not long after. Joseph named him Ephraim, "For God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction," he said. Asenath began to notice a pattern in the names her husband chose, each one a quiet testimony, a marker planted in the soil of Egypt to remind him, and perhaps to remind her, that suffering had not been the end of his story. It had been the doorway into something greater. But peace, Asenath was learning, rarely lasted in Joseph's life without being tested. The 7 years of abundance ended exactly as Joseph had foretold, and the famine that followed was unlike anything Egypt had ever known. The Nile itself seemed to shrink beneath a merciless sky. Fields that had once overflowed with grain turned to dust. Asenath watched from the palace windows as lines of desperate people stretched for what seemed like miles outside the storehouses, their faces hollow with hunger, their eyes fixed on the one man who held the power to feed them or turn them away. That man was her husband. Joseph worked without rest during those years, opening the storehouses, selling grain to Egyptians and foreigners alike, carefully managing supplies that stood between an entire region and starvation. Asenath rarely saw him during daylight hours. When she did see him, exhaustion had carved new lines into his face, though his resolve never wavered. It was during this famine that the tension Asenath had long sensed beneath the surface of her husband's calm finally broke into the open. One evening, Joseph returned to their chambers pale and shaken in a way she had never witnessed before, not even when he had spoken of the pit or the prison. He sat heavily, staring at nothing, his hands trembling slightly as he pressed them together. "Joseph," Asenath said carefully, moving to sit beside him. "What has happened?" For a long moment, he did not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My brothers came today." Asenath felt her heart still. She had heard the stories, the pit, the betrayal, the years of silence. She understood immediately what this meant. "Did they recognize you?" "No," Joseph said, "they stood before me and bowed to the ground, exactly as I once dreamed they would, so many years ago, when they mocked that very dream and hated me for it. They did not know the man before them was their own brother." He pressed his fingers against his eyes. "I could not tell them. Not yet. I accused them of being spies. I need to know if they have changed. I need to know if my youngest brother, Benjamin, still lives." Asenath studied her husband's face, searching for the anger she might have expected, the desire for vengeance after so many years of betrayal. She found none of it. What she found instead was something far more complicated: grief, longing, and a fragile, cautious hope. "What will you do?" she asked quietly. "I do not know yet," Joseph admitted. "But I know I cannot simply forgive them without first understanding whether they are still the same men who threw me into that pit." If you enjoy Bible stories filled with powerful lessons and unexpected moments, subscribe so you never miss another one. In the weeks that followed, Asenath watched her husband navigate a test more difficult than any famine. He held his brothers under suspicion, demanded that Benjamin be brought before him, wept in secret chambers where no one but a trusted servant could see him, and wrestled with a decision that would determine not only his own peace but the survival of an entire family, the family that would one day become a nation. Asenath did not interfere. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, that this was a wound only Joseph could choose to heal in his own time and in his own way. She offered him quiet support, a steady presence in a home increasingly filled with tension, as reports came that Joseph's brothers had returned not once but multiple times, each visit bringing them closer to a truth that would soon be impossible to hide. The day finally came when Joseph could no longer contain what he had carried for so long. Asenath was told the news through servants, spoken in hushed and astonished tones. Joseph had cleared the room of every Egyptian official, and alone with his brothers, had wept so loudly that his cries were heard throughout the palace. He had revealed himself to them at last. "I am Joseph," he had said. "Is my father still alive?" His brothers, Asenath was told, stood frozen in terror, unable to answer, certain that after all these years, judgment had finally come for what they had done to him. But judgment did not come. Forgiveness did. When Joseph returned to their chambers that night, his eyes were red, his voice hoarse, yet his entire bearing seemed lighter than Asenath had ever seen it, as though a burden carried for over 20 years had finally been set down. "I forgave them," he told her simply. "After everything they did to you?" Asenath asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Everything they did to me was meant for evil," Joseph said, his voice steady despite the emotion still trembling beneath it. "But God meant it for good, to save many lives, as it is happening even now, through this famine. How could I hold on to hatred, when I can see so clearly what it was all leading toward?" Asenath felt tears rise in her own eyes as she listened to him. She thought of her own life, torn from everything familiar and placed into a home she had never chosen, and she began to understand, more deeply than ever, the truth Joseph had tried to explain to her on their very first night together. Nothing had been random, not the pit, not the prison, not the famine, not even her own marriage to a Hebrew slave who had become the second most powerful man in Egypt. All of it had been woven together for a purpose far greater than any single person could see while living inside the pain of it. Joseph's father, Jacob, and his entire family soon made the long journey to Egypt, settling in the fertile land of Goshen under Joseph's protection. Asenath watched as her husband, the man once left for dead by his own brothers, wept in his father's arms after more than 2 decades of separation. She watched as an old man who had believed his beloved son was gone forever embraced him instead, alive, honored, and unmistakably transformed by everything he had endured. In the years that followed, Asenath raised her 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, within a household shaped by these extraordinary events. She watched as her father-in-law, before his death, gathered Joseph's sons onto his lap and blessed them as his own, declaring that they would be counted among the tribes of Israel, an honor Asenath could scarcely have imagined on the night she first stood trembling before Pharaoh's summons. Her sons, born to an Egyptian mother and a Hebrew father, would become the ancestors of 2 tribes within the nation of Israel, their names carried forward for generations, long after the famine had ended and the fields of Egypt had turned green once more. If this story blessed you today, subscribe, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and tell us in the comments what lesson impacted you the most. Asenath never forgot the emptiness she had once felt inside the temples of On, surrounded by gods that never answered. She had found, instead, in the life and faith of the man she married, a God who worked quietly through pits and prisons, through famine and forgiveness, through a marriage neither of them had chosen but both of them had come to cherish. She had entered Joseph's story as a stranger, a priest's daughter given away by decree. She left it as something far greater, a witness to one of the most remarkable examples of forgiveness, faith, and redemption the world had ever known. Her life reminds us of a truth that reaches far beyond ancient Egypt. We do not always choose the paths that are placed before us. We do not always understand, in the moment, why suffering comes, why plans change, or why we find ourselves standing in places we never imagined. But as Asenath learned standing quietly beside Joseph through famine and reunion, forgiveness and restoration, even the paths we do not choose can lead us into a purpose greater than anything we could have planned for ourselves. If Joseph could forgive the brothers who sold him into slavery, if Asenath could embrace a life she never expected and find faith within it, then perhaps we too can trust that whatever pit or palace we find ourselves in today, it is not the end of our story.